Hi, I'm John Atack. I'm extraordinarily pleased Ron Miscavige to the show, and I'm not quite sure what we're going to talk about actually, Ron, but is there something that you would like to start with, or should we explain to our viewers who you are, why you're so famous?
Yeah, why don't famous? All right. Well, listen, just so you know, I charge for these interviews. I should have told you earlier, and it's my charge is $1.13, cash only,
Okay.
John. Yeah. No, I'll
right.
tell you, there's a standing joke here in Milwaukee because I play in several different bands, and a lot of them, like the fact that I was on major network in the United States, so they consider me to be a celebrity, which I think is a joke. All I did is do my duty to expose a very suppressive cult, and it stuck in my throat that they took my family away from me. And I wrote a book which ended up being a #1 bestseller in the New York Times, and I did a lot of shows, and they considered me to be a celebrity. So I said, okay, fine, I'm going to charge you. So the charge is like $1.13. It's a joke. All right. I guess in English that would be about £1, right?
Yeah, pretty much. So I'll send you £1 over by carrier pigeon.
And you get a good carrier pigeon to be able to fly the ocean, boy. I'll tell you.
Well, we've been breeding.
Okay. All right, buddy.
Yeah,
so anything you want to talk about is fine with me.
Well, I mean, at the top of everybody's attention is the fact that you are the father of David Miscavige, who has been the leader of Scientology since he pushed Pat Broker out of the way after Ron Hubbard's death. And the question that comes to me, we've not had much of a conversation before now, just trying to set up Zoom and things like that. But I have read your book, which I think is extremely insightful. The question that comes to me is, you're very obviously a courteous, witty, intelligent human being. What happened? What went wrong that it seems peculiar that your son should be a tyrant of the type he is? How did that
happen? I don't know if I am 100% right, but I'm pretty damn close to that when I give you my answer now. But let me tell you this. I always reserve the right to be wrong. That I keep in reserve no matter what I do, because humility is a trait that I don't think you can inspect life and expect to come up with real answers unless you have a bit of humility in you and say, I could be wrong about this. But what I would like to say is this. David wasn't always that way. When he was a child, and I've said this many times, we got along famously. I mean, I enjoyed his company. He was a bright kid, tough, just enjoyable to be around. And I think, and I attribute this to his success, that he turned into that type of personality, because there was a man who was from England, Lord Acton. I'm sure you know the name. He lived in 1800.
Power, absolute power, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, he said exactly, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. By the way, he made another statement. I don't know if you're familiar with this. Something about, and I forget the exact, I'm going to paraphrase it.
Sure.
Most powerful men are bad men. And it's wild, because I just happened to be looking at his biography, and there's some other quotes. He was a brilliant individual. Yep. But anyway, getting back to David, though, I think his being able to handle the IRS and get that tax exemption for the church was the power that, at that point, he could do no wrong in the eyes of parishioners, because that's been a real pain in the neck. It's a thorn in your foot for the church for many years, the fact that they wouldn't recognize that it was religion. Of course, that's not even correct at all, but the fact that they would be able to call themselves a religion and get tax exemption. Once he got that in 1993, that was the beginning of his turning into from Dr. Jekyll into Mr. Hyde.
Mm.
And I think that's really what happened. And right now he, except the church is going down the drain. Let's face it. I mean, you can't, unless you live on another planet and you just come here. With the advent of the internet, the toothpaste is out of the tube, and you can't claim, that L. Ron Hubbard was a war hero when you can get the war records, and the guy wasn't even close to that. I just had a guest on from your country, on Martin Padfield. His father was in the RAF, and he received an award from the Queen. I mean, that's a war hero, I mean, what he did warranted that recognition. With L. Ron Hubbard, he made that stuff up. So with all these things coming out to the front, church membership going down, David is like the Commodore of the Titanic, and the only reason that ship stays afloat is because you have enough people, many of them brilliant, because you can't make billions of dollars without having some brilliance in you, making so much money that they can afford to give him $1 million or $10 million. So with that, you can buy a lot of bilge pumps to keep the water from sinking the Titanic.
Yeah.
And I just gave you my synopsis of what I think is happening with the church right now.
I mean, in terms of the transition in his personality, of course, having written a history of Scientology, been the researcher for a biography of Hubbard, those 800 pages of war records twice through, once with a former naval officer who served at the same time, I'm very familiar with the track that leads up to that. And the reason that I left Scientology in 1983 was primarily because of a statement made by your son at that time. He said at the Mission Holders Conference in San Francisco in October 1982, the Scientology was now going to be tough and ruthless. Now, the word tough didn't bother me. The word ruthless, without mercy, said, I can't belong to this group anymore. And that word was, so that there's this point where he is, I interviewed Didi Vogading, who was the commanding officer of the Commodore's messenger organization, by mail in 1984. And she, of course, was your son's boss when he was the action chief, and his job was to stop all of the writs that were being served against Ron Hubbard. There were about 300 active subpoenas. And
I didn't know that till this very moment.
Okay. And Didi said that the thing with David was, if you wanted anything done, he would do it. So if you had a wall that you wanted to knock down, he would lower his head and charge. He would get things done straight away. And I think that go-getter personality is a part of it. And
yeah.
I must say that, this is something you can clarify for me. Your son has asthma.
Yeah.
And pretty severe asthma. Did he, during childhood, receive treatment with steroids at all?
When he was a little kid?
When he was a boy, a teenager?
Yeah. Here's what would happen, John. And by the way, I got to say this. It's very nice meeting you.
Likewise.
Seen a lot of your stuff, and it's a pleasure. I got to tell you that. Just let me say that.
Me too. I didn't realize you'd be such a nice man. Nobody told me.
Well, I'll tell you what. In lieu of that, you can waive the $1.13.
Oh, thank you. Because I was a bit worried where that was going to come from.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So now, when he was a little kid, I'm the one that took him to Dr. Ziegler. That was the pediatrician, when he would have a severe asthmatic attack. And he would give him a shot of adrenaline or whatever was in there, and maybe more other things, steroids. I knew that wasn't okay for a kid. I knew that. I mean, you take a 5-year-old or a 3-year-old or 8-year-old. I tried many different homemade remedies I would do out of whole cloth to try to handle him. Did I ever tell you a story about the shower with him?
No, tell me that.
Okay, well, look, first of all, let me backtrack to when I was in the Marine Corps. I guess you know this if you read my book. I'm a United States Marine veteran.
Yep.
And I joined the Marines, did boot camp. I thought I was going to get a post on some base. I had to go to advanced combat training. Long and short of it, I ended up in Quantico, Virginia, which is the base where they train United States Marine officers how to be officers. And I had a job working in a battalion that's sole purpose was to demonstrate war problems to officers in training. And in other words, a battalion, we had a machine gun company, an infantry company, a communications company, all those component parts that would make up a small army. And they would go out into the field and demonstrate these. My job was working at battalion headquarters and giving the statistics of the prior day's activities, where they demonstrated a problem, how many rations of food were dished out at that place, how many people blew or, went AWOL and all that stuff. And I had a pretty good job because I could finish it by noon. And so everybody was hands off on me because don't fuck around with them. The guy's doing the job. Let him alone. I had a lot of spare time. Okay. One of the things I did actually on my work time was I went to get some dental work done.
Yeah.
And I had some dental work done. And the following day, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, this was after work, my face absolutely went into as if I was put in the iron mask. You know that thing where they would close and knives would go in your face? The pain was excruciating. And so the next day I went to see the dentist and he says, oh yeah, he says, that's what we call facial neuralgia. And I says, oh, well, how do you cure it? He says, well, we don't know that, but here's some aspirins. I said, what the fuck is this? You give it a name and that handles it? So they gave me the aspirins. They didn't work. Following day, I went down to the post exchange and I bought a bottle of bourbon. And literally at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I poured a glass, whipped it down, and it would knock me out and I'd sleep through the pain. So after about 3 days, I said, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to become an alcoholic. I took the bourbon, took it to a toilet and dumped it down, threw the bottle in the dust. And I went up, put on my work clothes, and I went up to the air station. There was an air station at that base. There was a gym up there. And I'm in pain. I'm in so much pain. My mouth is leaking saliva. I couldn't even tolerate it. To that degree, let's put it that way. So I went into the area where the weights were, and there was a guy there, and I said, look, do you want to spot me and I'll spot you? If you're lifting weights, you need somebody to make sure you don't hurt yourself. So I did a set of bench presses. He did a set. I did the second set. I said, take the weight. I said, hang on. The pain was gone. I mean, completely. It was like I never had the pain.
Wow.
So I literally sat. Now I'm 18 years old. I sat on the edge of the bench, and this is what I deduced. In order for pain to exist, you have to have your attention on it. If you can do something that threatens you and forces your attention off it, there is no more of a living force giving life to that pain. If I didn't pay attention to the bench press, it could crush my chest. So all of my attention went on that, and it went off the pain.
Yep.
Now, I didn't need Scientology to tell me that, but I think for some reason I fell into one of the truths of life. That's just my opinion now. I say I could be wrong, but let me tell you, that carried forward to now, going a little way further into the future. Dave is a little kid, and here's what I did one time. He was having an attack, and when I say an asthmatic attack, in the throes of it, you can't breathe out. You can breathe in, but you can't blow out. He was so much into it that he couldn't get fresh oxygen in, that he was starting to turn blue. Now, he's a little kid. This is the wintertime in a town called Willingboro, New Jersey, where I was raising my family. We had a walk-in shower upstairs. I took all of my clothes off. I took off all of his clothes. I went in the shower with him in my arms, and I said, Dave, I'm not trying to hurt you, kid. I got to do something to help you. I turned on the water, which was warm. Now, this is the winter time, and we had 2 faucets there. And I says, okay, here we go. And meanwhile, he's trying to catch his breath. I turned off all of the hot water, and that water come out like it was about 33 degrees Fahrenheit. We both started going. It forced him to start breathing. I took him out of the shower, wiped him down with the Turkish towel, and he was over the attack.
Excellent. Yeah.
So those were the things I had to do to handle that. Now, let's continue on, because there's a string that goes to the future on this.
Yep.
And by the way, I also took him to see a Scientology auditor, Frank Ogle. He had a cafeteria in South Jersey where I lived. And he gave him a session for about 45 minutes one time. And that session, whatever he did there, handled him. He never had a severe asthmatic attack. It didn't cure it, but he never had an attack where it was life-threatening from that point on.
Okay.
Now, fast forward to him being in the Sea Organization. He did have a severe asthmatic attack, so severe that they had to take him to a hospital to get handled. And the next day when he was handled and he was picked up, he said to the person who picked him up, who was Paul Grady, he said, Paul, I had a realization while I was in there. And Paul said, what was that? It's this. Power is not granted. It is assumed. And that assumption of power, he assumed the leadership of Scientology after L. Ron Hubbard died, pushed people out of the way that would oppose him, put people on posts that were for him, and that's how he attained that post as the chairman of the board. So that was a little story I thought I'd relate to, because I think that explains some things, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a very important statement that he and I think you say several things that are true. Firstly, that what it would be about 1952 that you were at Quantico and had your experience there. Early 50s?
It was in I joined in October of 1953, and I went to advanced combat in Camp Lejeune in the end of January. So it would be 1954.
54. David was born in 1960, is that right?
Yes.
Yep. And so you understood this thing that basically we respond to pain, but you can distract yourself from pain by focusing on something else, which is my experience too.
So there you go. Yeah.
And so, how old was he when the incident in the shower happened? About how old?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe about 6 or 7 years old. I can't rightly remember. He was about 6 or 7. But I mean, here's another thing I would do. Another deal is if he'd start, it looked like he was going to have an attack, I would take him out in the garage where I had weights, and I'd make him lift weights, which was what I did. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't.
Okay. And was he a bodybuilder? I've heard that he is a bodybuilder, that he's quite muscular.
Well, I don't know if he's a bodybuilder as much as he liked the idea of being strong, which I always did. Look, I was a skinny kid when I was small. I don't have great genes. Like some people are, they're born and they look like they've been lifting weights. That wasn't the case. So I started exercising as a young man, and I've done it. As a matter of fact, I still work out about 25, 26 times a month. And I'm 84 because I think that's something. Listen, John, the older you get, the more you have to exercise.
Oh, yeah.
When you're young, you can go out and get drunk, and you just kind of waste your body and it'll recover. But you get older, you got to put good food in it, work out, have a purpose in life. And but David was always strong. when he was a kid, and believe me, this is not a puff piece on David, but I got to tell you that when he was a kid, he wrestled. And he ended up in the regional Junior Olympics as a wrestler.
Wow.
And he wrestled 3 meets one day. He lost the third one. Did you ever wrestle collegiately?
No.
Oh, it is. They're short. They're maybe a minute and then 2 minutes each. At the end of the 5 minutes, you feel like you've run a marathon because it's solid. Yeah. It's like doing isometrics for 5 minutes straight, you know, pushing against an immovable object for straight, no let up. And he was that strong that he could take. Do you know what coping is? You know, the stuff around the doorway, that little trim. When he was a little kid, I could put him up and he would hang by his fingertips from the coping.
Okay.
So I'll tell you, we had some fun times together, and now he's a different person.
Yeah.
He's a different person.
When's the last time that you were in touch with him? When's the last time you spoke to him?
Shortly before I blew. I blew on March 25th, 2012. And there were times, even toward the end, when he would come to the base, many times when he would come to the base, he'd be there for maybe a month or 6 weeks, wouldn't even call me and say hello. And I'll be honest with you, I desired the communication more than anything.
Of course.
And then there were times before we left, before we blew, that when we'd be having lunch at what's a place called Masker Canyon Inn, which was the name of our eating area, we would eat and then we'd go outside and sit down on a nice flower bed. I remember before I left one time, he snuck up in back of me and grabbed me, you know, and we'd have conversations, and I love that. But once I left, that was the end of me communicating with him.
It's very sad. It's very apparent looking at your face that you love your son.
I do. And look, you know the story about me going in for food at a food market and coming out. Summertime, I had my cell phone in my shirt pocket, bent over. I thought the phone was going to fall out, so I grabbed my left chest. The private investigators were in a blacked out van looking at me, and they thought I was having a heart attack. They called in, and a couple minutes later, David got on the phone. At least a person got on the phone, identified himself as David Miscavige, and said, listen, if it's his time to die, let him die. Don't intervene. Don't do anything. Look, even with that, I have a very difficult time generating hate for him.
No.
I look at when you have kids, right, John?
I have 4 kids, John.
Okay, so now when that child is born and you see it, you have this unlimited love for that individual who's entered life, and you're going to be his caretaker and his loving parent. I can't hate David. It's terrible to say, because I guess people say, well, look at all the things he's done. You know what? Fuck you. I'm not going to turn off the love for mankind even. I don't care what they do. I'd say there's goodness in anybody, but you fed the wrong monster. You fed them the bad in you, you know?
Yeah. And if somebody is, you know, they do evil, terrible things, then the thing is to separate them out so that they can't do them anymore. It's not to hurt them in some way. It's not to attack them. I've always told my children that, you know, if they murder somebody, they need to come and find me and I'll help them bury the body. You know, their welfare is more important to me than anything else. That's just the truth of it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
whether
John.
That's a morally proud. Okay.
No, and it's the love that you have for the person that carries you through. Just like my cats, you know. I mean, they can do anything. I mean, I might scold them for doing something, but it's mostly just pure love, and of course they reciprocate, you know.
Yeah.
So that was that story. I think that was worth telling, you know.
Yeah, I agree with you. So there's a period of transformation for him. Let's look a little bit more at your life. You're a jazz trumpeter.
Yeah.
And how did you meet Scientology? How did Scientology enter your life?
Well, okay, let me just have some water.
Yeah, surely. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers. Now, I have a friend who said this to me. His name is Nelson Sandy. He says, you know, Ron, I used to be a doctor, but I lost my patience. It's still a funny statement. And I'll tell you, he's a singer, and we're doing a gig in Greenwood Lakes, New York. And we got off the bandstand, and we're standing at the bar. Guy came over and said, Nelson, you're a great singer. Can I buy you a drink? He said, no, but can I have the money? He was always fast on the uptake. Yeah. And one day he said to me, Ron, how would you like to make an extra $100,000 this year? I said, are you joking? Of course I would, you know. So he introduced me to a multi-level scam. I would say scam now. I didn't know it was at the time. Called Holiday Magic. Okay. You know, these multi-level things where the only people who make money are the people who start it, because the money flows up, you know. Yeah. Now, I joined up. Make a long story short, and we used to have what's called opportunity meetings, which was a meeting you'd go to, and you or somebody associated with you would stand in front of a chalkboard and show how you could make money doing this. Whereas you enter in as just a dealer, and then you become a master distributor, and then a general distributor. And everybody below you, when they buy product, you would receive a portion of that.
Yeah. Okay.
A pyramid scheme. Pyramid scheme. It looks good on paper, and it doesn't work. But it looked like it worked. So I'm at one of these meetings, and we were through with the demonstration, and we were talking to people there. And I have a girl next to me, Kathy. She was part of a team we formed, her and Nelson Sandy and a guy by the name of Jim Hearn, and we called us a corporate team. And we would go out as a team to recruit people to do this. She's talking to a person, I'm talking to a person. And that person says to her, I'm a Scientologist. I stopped talking to the guy I was talking to, and I says, hey, what is that? And I pinned them down. For some reason, the name rang a bell. I don't know what about it was the thing that just appealed to me, but it appealed to me. And a good 30 minutes, he was telling me about it. And he told me what to do if I ever had a headache. He said, look, if you become a Scientologist, you never have to take another aspirin. I said, well, what do you mean? And so he told me a little process to do. I said, well, I don't have a headache now. And a couple weeks later, I'm driving my car and on down this road in New Jersey, and I had a headache. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm going to try this. I tried it. The headache went away. So I then found a place that they so-called taught Scientology. It happened to be a squirrel operation, but nevertheless, it was run by a guy by the name of Frank Ogle. He had a cafeteria about 30 miles away from where I lived. Every Tuesday or Wednesday, I forget which day it was, he would have a meeting, and there'd be a group of maybe 10 or 15 people that would go in there, and he would talk about Scientology and have you practice like the communication formula. And after about a month of that, I gave up on it because I thought, okay, I get the point. The point is you don't want to become the effect. You want to always be cause. And I learned a little bit about communication. That was the entrance point. But then what really snagged me is when I took David to see Frank Ogle. I mentioned this earlier. And he took David in session. And after about 45 minutes, David came out and he was bright. And I said, Dave, how's it going? He said, Daddy, I'm handled. And with that auditing session, he never had a severe attack that was life-threatening. He had asthmatic attacks, but it mitigated it to the degree that he could live with it. All right.
Yeah, yeah.
But when that happened, I said to myself, I got to get my family in. And that's what I did.
What year was that?
I guess that was in 1969, basically. But we actually got in Scientology in 1970. That was when I actually started in Scientology proper. I took my family down. I have 4 kids. On Saturday morning, we used to go down as a family, and they would do TRs, or they had short little auditing sessions, and my wife and I would receive auditing. And I can remember, do you know what a humpback railroad crossing is?
Yes, I do. We have them here, yeah.
Yeah, or the railroad, and of course, you have to go up over this because they're not going to level out the land for the railroad tracks. I had a BMW in those days, and one of the things that the kids wanted me to do, and I would always do, and my wife would scream, "Don't do it, don't do it." I'd jam it up to about 75, hit it, and we'd be airborne. So my wife was yelling, "Don't do it," and the kids, "Yeah, do it, Dad." You know. So I'll tell you, when we got in, it was 180 degrees different than it is today, John. 180 degrees. There was some joy in it. There was, even though, let's face it, the little bit of beginning stuff you have, like the communication course, I got gains out of it. The beginning auditing. Once you get into getting these super, which nobody has ever achieved, I was involved for 42 years. I never met one person who achieved that. Yet I met a tremendous amount of people who pretended they did.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a guy in those days called Bob Michaels. His wife is Priscilla Michaels. And he said to me one day, he says, "You know, Ronnie, there's a lot of pretending going on, isn't there?" A simple but true statement. I was doing it too. Come on, you know. I got L10, and you're supposed to get exterior with full perception. David Mayo's wife audited me. I'm coming to the end of the process, and I look a little BI. She says, "What's up, Ron?" I said, "Well, look, we're almost done, and I haven't gone exterior with full perception. I thought that I was going to get that." You know what she said to me? She said, "Listen, I've audited a lot of people. None of them have ever gone full exterior with full perception." So I came back, and I became what's called a flag celebrity. I'd go out to these meetings where they have people to try to recruit them to go to flag. And I would try to not flat out lie, but say, well, look, on that level, you take the universe apart, and it gives this completely flowery description of what happens, which in itself was true, but neglected to say, listen, I was conned. That would have been the ultimate truth, which was, by the way, eventually, I have a friend in Las Vegas who left the Scientology in the 90s, a very good friend. And he said to me one day, we're both out. He said, "Let's face it, Ronnie, we were conned." I remember hanging up the phone, going in a hallway where I have a full-length mirror. I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, "You were conned." At that point, and I didn't say you were conned, but the reason I didn't justify it. It was a flat statement. You were conned. I started peeling the onion, and that's really was the best thing to start my rehabilitation.
I mean, in terms of peeling the onion, let me tell you a story about exterior with full perception. This is something that happened aboard the Apollo. One night, Mary Sue Hubbard started having a shouting match with Ron Hubbard. This used to happen every now and then. She accused him of being a charlatan. She said, none of this works. You've made all of this up. It's all nonsense. This is Mary Sue Hubbard. This is the Deputy Commodore, the controller of the Guardian's office. And Hubbard said to her, "Look, what do I have to do that proves that this is true?" And she said, "I've never been exterior with perception. full perception or any kind of perception. I've never been exterior perception. And so Otto Rose, who at the time had the post that David Mayo would later have, he was Hubbard's auditor, he was the head of the tech. Hubbard said to him, dig out every exteriorization process there is and run it on Mary Sue until she goes exterior. Otto told me they lasted a few weeks and they went through a lot of processes. And in the end, she said, I can't take any more of this.
No kidding.
So in simple terms, what Scientology is that we believe, and we therefore allow our imaginations to run riot and believe in these things. But as you say, the thing that startles me, having talked to over 1,000 people who've done Scientology processing and helped about 600 to recover after the experience, there were no clears. Nobody threw their spectacles away. Nobody was cured of a serious illness. Nobody rose from the dead or got rid of their cancer. All of these claims, which were so loudly made in the books, none of them is true. Right from the beginning, where Hubbard said in Dianetics, he says there are 270 people that he's applied this to. I interviewed Don Rogers, who was with him when he wrote the book and had been with him for 3 months, And Rogers told me, he said, when he got the contract for the book, he turned to me and he said, deep trance hypnosis is not favored anymore. I'm going to have to come up with something new. So Dianetics was written with no cases whatsoever. All he'd done was been hypnotizing people. They'd get spontaneous remission, as you do in faith healing. For a few days, they'd feel better. Maybe a few weeks, they'd feel better. Then it would all come back. So the original supporters of Dianetics, Joe Winter, Art Sepos, who published the book and withdrew it because he said it was fraudulent. He was a medical publisher. He came to the decision it was fraudulent. John Campbell Jr., who published the article in Astounding, they all left because it didn't work. And he kept getting a new intake of people, and he built a group. And between us, we imagined this thing into existence. We imagined these states of mind. And the thing that surprises me, having talked with, David Mayo and Otto Rose and, Hannah Whitfield, all sorts of people who are at the very top of Scientology, not one of them ever, John McMaster, not one of them ever told me a miracle story. That none of them had ever, levitated. None of them had ever gone to the other side of the planet. None of them had remembered being Japanese and could now speak Japanese.
Yeah.
We bought into fantasy, and we traveled with it. What was it that finally made you? Because when you published your book, I know the publisher here in the UK, and he'd republished Russell Miller's Barefaced Messiah, and he'd published Tony Ortega's excellent Unbreakable Miss Lovely. And suddenly he found himself publishing your book, which at the back of it recommends some Ron Hubbard books. So at that point, you still had some faith in Scientology. Is that right?
Absolutely.
You still
absolutely.
Thought something. What was it that changed your mind?
Well, let's put it this way. Of course, you've read New Slant on Life.
I've read all of the Scientology books.
Yeah, of course you did. And I don't mean that as an insult to you, but I just rhetorically.
Of course not. I had too much time on my hands, so I read all those damn books. Yeah. But as the historian of the movement, I had to read them.
There's certain things like in these little essays. That's believable. It's like common sense almost. You know what I mean? He's not making claims or being able to think in your mind of happier times, which would be self-analysis. That's harmless in itself, and there may be some good out of it, because I know if I think of some good times I had when I was a little kid, but I've never, and if I did it by mistake, and that's why I say I reserve the right to be wrong, recommend that you sit down with somebody and actually think you're going to go into a past life, recover something, and now it is changed for now. Mm-hmm. Although I personally believe that there are people who have achieved things without Scientology, of course, and they don't know how they did it, that you could consider to be supernatural. But my feelings on the tech at that time, I was still a bit tied to it because I felt the communication course, I'll be honest with you, that little bit of a course that I did really helped me quite a bit. Matter of fact, I still believe you should give somebody an acknowledgement if they say something to you.
Yeah,
I don't think.
Which, by the way, didn't come from Hubbard. It came from a man called Burton Farber, who.
Well, then I'm a
we need
Burton.
to acknowledge things, you know.
Then I'm a Burton Farberist fan. Okay, because I do believe the anatomy of that communication cycle, if that's the guy who invented it, was brilliant. Okay. And, you know, the other thing I believed in was if you're going to talk to somebody about, maybe they want to tell you their problems. And if you can truly listen to it and get the guy telling you the story knows that you're understanding his situation and you give him a good acknowledgement, there's value in that. There's therapeutic value in that.
I
agree. That probably was the biggest thing of all that kept me tied. Because, see, when you get in, of course, you know this, and I'll state it just out in the open. The very beginning, the processes, the bit of communication you have with another person in a session, the communication course, get you to think, this is good, this works. As you go on, there could be something introduced that if you, on face value, you think, well, this doesn't make sense. And then you say, but I'll accept it because everything up till now has been true. And at that point, you're hooked and your mind is fertile to then accept everything. And then you start building a matrix of these not necessarily agreed with in principle, but in fact, agree that it must be true because everything in the beginning was true. Now you're building up as I forget which writer was, the prison in your own mind.
Yeah,
that is better than a prison with bars, with everything. Because, John, I've said this many times. I'll say it again. If you took an armored bus and crashed the gate at the international base in Hemet, went there, got everybody out, and said, "Listen, if you get on the bus, we will give you money, we'll give you a job, and if you don't have skills, we'll train you in skills. We'll give you a place to live." And a safe place for a safe environment for you to enjoy life. I don't know if you'd get a taker.
No.
Because it isn't the gate and the barbed wire that's keeping it there. It's their own mind.
When Lawrence Wright wrote about the FBI raids in 1977, he couldn't understand why it was that nobody on the Rehabilitation Project force in Los Angeles left. That they could have left. And so trying to get it over to people that the prison is in your mind. And that, I mean, the one statement I've heard again and again is, lose my immortality if I leave Scientology. For me, that's always been a ridiculous idea. And Hubbard, in fact, says in one place that it is a ridiculous idea, but he's got people pinned to this idea. I heard of a terrible case, a woman who'd worked in the organization for more than 40 years. She then is in her 70s. They don't want her anymore because she's not efficient, so they just throw her out. Then one of their salespeople, one of the registrars, goes to her and says, "You've done all of the OT levels, you've done the L's, you've done all of these things. However, there's this new process, superpower, and if you don't do it, you'll be picked up by one of the implant stations when you leave the planet, and you'll lose everything you get. That will be another £35,000, please."
Jesus God.
She was an old age pensioner with nothing but a state pension, and she borrowed the money and gave it to them. Just so, because of this scam about your immortality and the implant stations and all of this, the manipulation of fear, the manipulation, the phobia that's put in. Okay, I think that this would be probably a good point to end because I don't want to exhaust things, but I would love to come back and talk to you again if that's all right.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure talking to you, John. I'm glad you called me to do this. I was shocked that I could talk for 2 hours on it, but you know, we have a storehouse of memories and incidents that we talk about. I personally would rather do shorter ones because I think if people see that this is only going to be maybe 40 minutes, They say, I'll take the time. But if it's going to be an hour or 2 hours, I'll do it later, and they never get back to it.
Yeah, I must say that we've been very fortunate on our channel in that because we can see whether people come back. People will often watch 20 minutes and then another 20 minutes and then another 20 minutes. But I tend to agree. You don't want to overwhelm people. And you've given us a lot of fascinating information today. So,
well,
I'm going to switch off. Thank you very much. But we'll keep talking beyond that, okay, for a few minutes.
John, it's been my pleasure. And you're more than welcome to call me, and we'll do some more in the future.
Great, fantastic. So,
all right,
I'm John. This is my wonderful guest, Ron Miscavige. Thank you very much for watching.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.